Hello and welcome to Minute MLOps. So this week I bumped into Thierry B, not to name him, at the coffee machine, who asked me two excellent questions. The first was, "Hey Guillaume, your videos are excellent, but really get yourself a microphone." And the second, "Hey Guillaume, your videos were great at first. I learned a lot about AI, but then you started talking about debuggers, TDD, clean code. I really don't understand what you're getting at." So thank you, Thierry, for these questions. For the first, I'll do what I can. I'm looking for a microphone. And for the second, what's happening is that AI is quite simply the future. And on the one hand, I have developers like you, Thierry, like me. You have just over 15 years experience in API development. API development, you've made lots of APIs, dozens and dozens of APIs that call databases, that call web services. You've done dozens of web front ends in JavaScript. And you'd like to know a little more about the world of data. So how do you make AIs? And on the other hand, there are plenty of fairly young profiles coming onto the market, profiles that are prefixed by data, including data scientists. They know the data workflow, they know how to train AIs, but they often, but not always, have gaps, and we still need to support them in good development practices to ensure that our projects go into production. And in fact, that's the whole point of these videos, to bring the two worlds together so that we can create great projects that go into production and meet users' needs. And that's really the goal. We're aiming for production. So I'll show you something that might interest you, which is that if I go back to our project for classifying cats, dogs, and so on, I repeat, we have a package directory here which will contain the common code between training and production. Why is that? Because if we have a tiny pre-processing diff between training and production, our project won't work in production. We have the code that exposes our API in production, and the whole training pipeline made up of lots of little independent boxes that will enable us to train our model. And if you look at the training here, the definition of our AI, it's just under 10 lines of code. And in almost all projects, the model definition is just under 10 lines of code. So you need expertise to do that. On the other hand, the project is made up of thousands of lines of code, and all that is code. You have to respect good code practices, unit tests, clean code, etc. So I'm going to explain to you, Thierry, how this works. Now, historically, data science jobs were research jobs. But today, it's becoming industrialized. There are frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch, and most of the time, we're not going to retrain models from scratch. We reuse models that have already been trained and modify certain parts to meet our needs. Here, for example, is TensorFlow. It's a VGG16. It's a model that's already been trained on millions of images, a bit of the everyday life. We're not going to load the last layer of neurons. We're going to freeze the layers so as not to retrain them. Here, I've added a dropout. So the idea is to put some noise in the pipeline, in the training, so that the model doesn't learn by heart from the training data, because a model can learn by heart from the training data and then perhaps won't work well on production data, so it won't be generalized. Then we create an intermediate network here with 128 neurons. And finally, we have 3 neurons at the output, i.e. my cats, my dogs, and my other one. Here we compile our model with characteristics that we don't have time to detail here. But the message is that making a model today is 10 lines of code. Today, you need to know that there's Hugging Face, which is the GitHub of data. It's like open source for models. and there are thousands and thousands of models available. And most of the time in today's projects, we don't create models from scratch. We take existing models and adapt them to our needs. That we adapt to our needs, which saves us a lot of time because we need less CPU, less compilation time, and less data too. So that's how it works today. So now I'm going to continue with two last messages that I'm going to address, mainly to the data scientist profile. The idea is, and this will interest you too, Thierry, that data profiles often code in notebooks. So what's a notebook? It's a web interface and you can code in it. It can be great because you can explore the data, visualize the results fairly quickly, and code on the fly. Typically, we've got little boxes here, and we can modify the code in the little boxes, run it, and get feedback with prints, which means you can get very visual feedback very quickly. The message is that at the start of a project, when you're making prototypes, so as to know whether you can do the project, it can be very good for exploring, for prototyping. However, as soon as you know that your project is going into production, abandon the notebooks and switch to test, drive, and development mode in an IDE with the debugger and all the tools that will save you time. This will enable you to industrialize your developments and save time. The second very important message is that training code is no more and no less than production code. It's because you're going to put your API into production. And if tomorrow you have a sudden incident or drift and need to retrain, well, for example, if your training takes 48 hours or a week, well, if your project blocks the company, i.e., it could go bankrupt, it could sink. Well, you risk sinking the company if your training code isn't fast. If there's a bug in it that needs changing, if there's no test, if it's difficult to change, well, you risk sinking the company. So the drive code must be clean, it must be unit tested, and it's production code. So if you touch somewhere in there, for example, to the AI pipeline, for example, you're going to get feedback during the training stage, you're going to get statistics coming back up. But these statistics are just statistics. What you need to know is that as long as you don't deploy its ISO production environment, you won't have statistics that are closer to reality in production. Another message is that all profiles on a project must be able to focus on production and deploy their ISO production environment. That's your final goal. Everyone's final goal must be to get the project up and running in production. Thank you and see you soon for more videos.